Today, we're going to look at the calendar found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's what today is essentially all going to be around. This is going to be a really, really awesome study. The first section of it today, though, is, as you see up here, the Zadokite calendar, part 2 of this weekend's teaching. This is going to sort of be a calendar 101 study, and then the next 2 teachings will get into a lot more depth, okay? So the first thing that I just want to talk about, and a lot of you have already come to this conclusion, already know, but we just got to sort of touch the lunar calendar just a little bit and show that it's off. I know a lot of you have already come to this conclusion, but I just want to make sure that we hit a couple verses in Jubilees that show this. So, we know that the lunar cycle is 29 and a half days. All right, which means after 12 cycles, after 12 months, we're going to be about 10 days short, 11 days short of the solar cycle. And so I want to go to Jubilees chapter 6, verse 35. So I'm going to look at Jubilees 6, 35 through 38. Okay, and I know this is a little lengthy, but just pay attention to how the book of Jubilees writes this, right? For I know, and from henceforth will I declare it unto thee, and it is not of my own devising, for the book lies written before me, and on the heavenly tablets the division of days is ordained, lest they forget the feasts of the covenant and walk according to the feasts of the Gentiles after their error and after their ignorance. For there will be those who assuredly will make observations of the moon, how it disturbs the seasons and comes in from year to year 10 days too soon. For this reason the years will come upon them when they will disturb the order and make an abominable day the day of testimony, and an unclean day a feast day. And they will confound all the days, the holy with the unclean, and the unclean day with the holy. For they will go wrong as to the months and Sabbaths and feasts and jubilees. For this reason I command and testify to thee, that thou mayest testify to them, and after your death your children will disturb them, so that they will not make the year 364 days only. And for this reason they will go wrong as to new moons or head of the months, as seasons, Sabbaths, festivals, and they will eat all kinds of blood with all kinds of flesh. Right? So we see this right here, that the writer of Jubilees is saying, listen, first of all, there's going to be a prophecy. We're going to prophesy that you're going to go off and not keep the feasts, but you're going to keep the Gentiles' feasts. We all know that this has been the case. And then you're also going to make observations of the moon, and it's going to disturb the seasons. It's going to change the calendar. All right? And that's what's happened in Judaism today, and we saw that a little bit last night. Let's take another look at Jubilees chapter 2, verse 9. And it says, and this gives a little more detail into Genesis 1. It says, and God appointed the sun to be a great sign, okay, on the earth for days and for Sabbaths and for months and for feasts and for years and for Sabbaths of years and for jubilees and for all seasons of the years, okay. Now that's not saying that the moon and the stars don't play a part. What does it say? A great sign, a greater sign. That is the primary sign that we go off of. And in fact, if you even look at the lunar calendar, if you actually think about it, the one that the Jews use today, the only thing they actually base the moon off of, that their calendar is actually based off of, or using the moon to base something off of, is the month. All right? That's the only thing. Their years, what are they governed by? Sun. Their days, what are they governed by? Sun. All right? All of these things, the only thing, though, is the moon. All right? The moon governs the month. That's the only really part of the year that they use the moon for. All right? And if you really think about that, you're like, wait a second. So they're actually using the sun a lot, and then the moon just a little bit. They sort of pick and choose. Right? So I just wanted to sort of take 5 minutes or so and touch on that. But the bigger thing that I wanted to look at today, which is growing, and I know you guys have heard a lot of, is the 364-day calendar, which is what we're going to talk about, and the 360-day solar calendar. All right, and I wanted to look at some of the differences. I wanted to look at why we choose the 364, why the 364 is correct, okay? So let's go to Jubilees chapter 6, verse 29 through 32. And it says, "And they placed them on the heavenly tablets. Each had 13 weeks. From one to another past their memorial. And from the first to the second, and from the second to the third, and from the third to the fourth. And all the days of the commandment will be 52 weeks, or 52 weeks of days. And these will make the entire year complete. According to this reckoning, 364 days, and these will constitute a complete year, and they will not disturb its time from its days and from its feasts." Right? So we've got this situation in Jubilees where it's giving us an exact number, 364 days. You've got 52 weeks and 4 seasons that are divided up into 13 weeks. 13, 13, 13, and 13, right? So we have actual, depending on how you viewed last night, we've got ancient writings supporting a 364-day calendar, right? And so is the next slide the calendar? Let's take a look at it real quick. Okay, so this is the calendar. It may be a little tough to see, but we have, it's very, very cool how this works. So we've got month 1, 2, and 3, month 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Okay, now what's interesting here is you will see that month 1, 4, 7, and 10, all right? Thank you for passing those out. Month 1, 4, 7, and 10 all look the exact same, at least in the day that it starts and the day that it ends. And then months 2, 5, 8, and 11 all look the same as well. And then months 3, 6, 9, and 12. So you'll see this pattern. There's a nice 91-day pattern for each of the 4 seasons that as long as you know what season you're in or if you know that it's month 1, day 1, then guess what? You know exactly the rest of the season and you know the rest of the year. It's a perfect pattern. And we'll talk about this a little more. Let's go to this quote that we have. And this was absolutely amazing. So me, John, and Steve were talking about the calendar probably back in early January. And all of a sudden, it's like January 20th, 28th or so, 25th, was that it? There's all these, there's these articles that are popping up everywhere about a Dead Sea Scroll find, okay? Like a new Dead Sea Scroll find. And it was about the calendar. And I'm just going to read a quote from one of the articles about this specific calendar that we're going to talk about today. And this is what the researchers, the 2 main researchers who published this scroll said this: "The lunar calendar, which Judaism follows to this day, requires a large number of human decisions. People must look at the stars and moon and report on their observations, and someone must be empowered to decide on the new month and the application of leap years. By contrast, the 364-day calendar was perfect." This is what Jews in Israel are saying. Think about that. They write in the Journal of Biblical Literature, "Because this number can be divided into 4 and 7, special occasions always fall on the same day. This avoids the need to decide, for example, what happens when a particular occasion falls on the Sabbath, as often happens in the lunar calendar. The Qumran calendar is unchanging, and it appears to have embodied the beliefs of the members of this community regarding perfection and holiness." And this is the 2 researchers are Dr. Eshbal Ratzon and Professor Jonathan Ben Dov from the University of Haifa, right? And so this calendar, and we'll talk about it, you will never have Yom Kippur on a Sabbath. You will never have trumpets on a Sabbath. You will never have those types of things falling on a Saturday because they're already set, as you'll see and we'll talk about, all right? Can we take a look back at the calendar again, Corey? And so if you'll look down, months 1, 4, 7, and 10 always start on the 4th day or a Wednesday, right? And I'll talk about that in a minute. There's 91 days per season. Okay, 91 days per season, and you've got 13 weeks per season, right? Which is 52 weeks and 364 days a year. And these, if you notice on months 3, 6, 9, and 12, there is a 31st day. Now, some people argue about if it should be called day 31 or if it's just should be called a transitional period. It's debated. But when they actually found this stuff in January, they actually learned that this day was called in Hebrew Tekufa, which means transition between each period or each period of the seasons. And we'll actually talk about that a little more later today. So I just wanted to give you sort of a breakdown. You see the feast there, and we'll talk a little more about the feasts in a minute. But I wanted to just make sure that you saw and just got a basic overview. You see that months, the far left column, they start on Wednesday. The middle column is going to start on, those months start on Fridays always, and the far right column is always going to start on Sundays, all right? So that's how the months are. So you actually never have a new month starting on a Sabbath either as well. So I want to talk about, before we get there, I want to talk about the 360-day theory. And some view the 12 months and 30-day months, meaning that the year must be exactly 360 days. And I understand why, and there's legitimate reason why, but I'm going to show you why today. There's a little more details that we have to slowly go through to take a look at this and what's going on. And what some people will argue is Hezekiah's sundial. We've all heard that one, right? Hezekiah's sundial, it went back 10 degrees, and so because of that, everything got thrown off. Well, if you have your sundial going back 10 degrees, okay, guess how much that changes the actual year? If your sundial goes back 10 degrees, it changes the year by 40 minutes. That's it, okay? 40 minutes. It's not going to change it from a 360-day calendar to a 365 and a quarter day calendar. Essentially, Hezekiah's sundial, it's irrelevant when it comes to the calendar, okay? It only would change it 40 minutes for the whole entire year. Right, now let's take a look at Noah, okay? Everybody brings up Noah, and because to support a 360-day calendar, or at least say that the 360-day calendar, that's how it was to begin with. And we've been taught when we just read it, and if you know the story, if you've looked at it a lot, they go into the ark, it floods from the 17th day of the second month to the 17th day of the seventh month, and then it also gives this idea that there's 150 days. And so when you take that idea from the second month, 17th day, to the seventh month, 17th day, and then apply 150 days, well, that means that you have a 5-month period of 150 days, which is 30-day months, right? So it would seem like that, and if you look up here on this calendar, there's no consecutive 5 months that have 30 days. So that's why people come to the conclusion that this doesn't work, all right? But let's read the story and read it slowly, okay? And let's see if we can understand what's going on. So let's go to Genesis chapter 7, verses 11 and 12. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Okay? So right here we can pinpoint, and you can look at your calendar as well if you want to. You can circle 217, right? 217, and so it rains 40 days and 40 nights. All right. Then in verse 24 of chapter 7, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. Okay. Now let's go to Genesis chapter 8, verse 2. And the fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. and the waters receded continually from the earth, and at the end of the 150 days, the waters decreased. Okay, the waters decrease at the end of the 150 days. Then the ark rested in the 7th month, the 7th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month, and in the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. When we read this at surface level, it seems like, hey, it's 5 months, 30 days, right? 150 days. But if we look at this and we read, and the water, in verse 3, and the waters receded continually from the earth, and at the end of 150 days the waters decreased. Then the ark rested in the 7th month. If you start your count on 2/17 on our calendar, on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, and you count 150 days from that mark, guess where you end? The 150th day is the day before Sukkot, which means it goes 150 days, the waters gradually decrease, and then when you actually look at the Hebrew here, at the end of 150 days, what does it say? It says the waters do this. When you read the actual Hebrew, it goes waters decrease, decrease, decrease at the end of 150 days. All right. And then it says it rests on the mount on the 17th day of the 7th month. All right. Corey, can you bring up the calendar again? All right. So if we were to have it on our calendar, it starts on 2/17 and it goes 150 days. And then it's interesting how when we get to Sukkot, exactly at Sukkot, it begins to drastically recede. And we get to the 17th day where it's resting on the mountains of Ararat. Now, this may seem a little confusing, but I want to throw this out here, is that if you actually put this on a 360-day calendar, it still doesn't make sense. And the reason is because when you put it on a 360-day calendar and you start on 2/17, what people never do is they never count inclusively. What day did the rain start? 2/17, right? And if you put it on a 360 calendar, 150 days later, you end up on 7/16, not 7/17. Count your days, all right? You have to count inclusively. 2/17 starts, that's day 1. Day 150 is 7/16, all right? So it really doesn't matter. It's essentially irrelevant, the argument, because it's 151 days on a 360-day calendar from 2/17 to 7/17, all right? And I know there's a lot of counting and that's a lot of stuff in your brain, but when you actually count these days out, it doesn't add up. But it's interesting how when you have 2/17 on this calendar, you count 150 days, where do you end up? First day of Sukkot. That's really interesting. And then once you get to Sukkot, boom, it drastically, the waters, when you read it in the Hebrew, the waters just, and you get to 2/17 where it rests right in time for Shabbat on the next day. All right. And so I also just want to move on a little bit and talk about Revelation briefly, okay? But we'll hit that later this afternoon, but I just want to talk about Revelation because of the idea that in Revelation, we always hear 3 big time stamps, right? 3.5 years, the times half a times, right? The 1,260 days and the 42 months, right? Well, if we have 1,260 days, 42 months, and 3.5 years, and we start them all at the same time and end them all at the same time, that's a 360-day calendar. It is, okay? But we'll take a look later and see if this actually is true, because maybe some of these things are starting earlier, and maybe we've assumed something on this 3.5-year issue, all right? So Corey, I think we can move on to the 4th day, because I want to talk about the 4th day briefly. Okay, and so the reason we start this calendar, and the reason this calendar is started on the 4th day, is because in Genesis 1, chapter 14 verse 14 through 19, it says, "Then God said, let there be lights in the firmaments of the heavens, to divide the days from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmaments of the heavens, and to give light on the earth. And it was so. Then God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars also, so set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So evening and morning were the fourth day." Okay? So what governs the calendar? Sun, moon, and stars, right? When was the sun, moon, and stars established? Day 4. That's why the year starts on day 4 every single time. Okay? And that's why months 1, 4, 7, and 10 will start on day 4 every single time. And actually, unleavened bread and Sukkot will start on day 4, all right? Every single time. Always on a Wednesday. And so with 364 days, right, we always have this idea, well, you know, the sun's going around the earth, or the earth's going around the sun, depending on what you think, 365 and a quarter days, right? And so 364 days, there's something, you know, it's not going to line up exactly right, okay? So I just want to let you know, we are still studying very hard the intercalation and how it works, okay? Because there is some intercalation on how this calendar is set up, but I want to tell you what Dr. Rachel Elior, whom I quoted last night, who I highly recommend you going and looking at. I want to tell you what she and other scholars have said about this calendar and how that it's intercalated. Because we know that if we do this calendar 100 years and we don't intercalate somehow, we're going to be celebrating Passover in winter, right? That's just honest what's going to happen, all right? And what she says is that the priests, okay, this is amazing, but that the priests would intercalate a week after every 7 years and 2 weeks after every 28 years, all right? And so a week after every 7 years and a week and 2 weeks after every 28 years, all right? So when you start, say like this year, it actually was perfect this year. The equinox occurred on Tuesday. The year begins on Wednesday. But say we start this in 28 years, it'll be exactly perfect again. The equinox will happen on a Tuesday, and then we'll start again and the first day is on a Wednesday, all right? First day of the year is on a Wednesday. But I just want to let you know there is some intercalation, and we will continue to research this. If anybody is an astronomer, we need your help. Because we are still looking at how to intercalate, but scholars are saying the priests would intercalate on the sabbatical years, and that's how they would know. It's not man's observation, that's how they knew when the sabbatical years were. They would add an extra week, okay? That would go at the end of the year, and not part of that year and not part of the next year, just at the end of the year before it would be added on. So that way it still stays in sync. So once again, this is based on the sun, so the spring equinox, it usually happens right after, the Wednesday after the spring equinox is going to be your first day of the year, all right? So let's talk about the feasts here for a second. So the appointed times. So I just want to talk about these real quickly. Passover is always going to be on a Tuesday evening. Okay, it's always going to be on a Tuesday evening because unleavened bread will always occur on a Wednesday and it will end on a Tuesday, right? First fruits, this date at least may seem a little awkward or weird, but first fruits will be on the 26th day of the first month. That is a full week after unleavened bread, okay? It's not within the Feast of Unleavened Bread, it's after. Then you count 7 Sabbaths from that day and you get to Shavuot, which is third month, 15th day. That's always going to be on a Sunday. First fruits is always going to be on a Sunday. Then we've got Yom Teruah, or trumpets. That will always begin on a Wednesday because it's the first day of the 7th month. And then we've got the Day of Atonement. It will go from Thursday evening to Friday evening. Okay? So we don't actually have a full back-to-back Sabbath there. The only time you have back-to-back Sabbaths is Shavuot. And then Sukkot goes from Wednesday to Wednesday. Okay? And so I just want you to see that. And so you don't have to worry about, oh, is Sukkot starting on Friday this year? Is this on Tuesday? No, it's on Wednesday. Wednesday to Wednesday every year. Unleavened bread always starts on Wednesday. Passover is always going to be on a Tuesday night. All right, so it's set. It's a set calendar, and it's really nice, and it really works perfectly, and we don't have to guess and see, when is exactly when the equinox is happening, or exactly when this moon is coming in, or whatever we've been looking at, right? So let's move on to the highly controversial Passion Week. Because how many of us have studied the calendar, and trying to figure out the Passion Week is just absolutely almost impossible. Has anybody done that? I've done that. Steve's done that. There we go. We got a few in here. Okay. So we talked about last night, right? John always uses Feast of the Jews, right? He uses this term, Feast of the Jews Feast of Tabernacles, the Jews' Feast of Passover. Why is he using this? Because the Jews were on the lunar calendar, right? But the Zadokite calendar is based off of the solar. And so this year, not this year, but the year that Yeshua was crucified, that year we know that the Judean Passover occurred on a Wednesday night, and the Zadokite Passover occurred on a Tuesday night, as always, right? And so we'll see that Yeshua keeps the Zadokite Passover on Tuesday night, and then he's crucified on the first day of unleavened bread on this calendar, but being a witness and a testimony to the Jews, he's crucified on the day of their Passover. It's amazing how they overlap actually that year. And one thing that I thought was really cool when studying this year is because the question came up even in our community, well, if Yeshua, kept the Passover, then why, how does that make him the Passover lamb? Because if he's crucified the next day on the first day of unleavened bread, that doesn't really make sense. Well, first of all, when the disciples ate the bread and drank the wine, did they not eat of the Passover lamb? Was he not the Passover lamb? Okay. Then we talk about these verses where it says, Colossians chapter 2, 14 and 15, and it says, Yeshua has taken it out of the way, having it nailed to the cross, okay? Having disarmed the principalities and powers, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in it, okay? So at his death on the cross, he made a public spectacle of the enemy, all right? Well, if you look at unleavened bread, the word for bread, lechem, right? If you look at its root, guess what it means? To make war. Guess what we see Paul saying unleavened is all the time? That's holiness, right? So what is Yeshua actually doing the moment he's going up on the tree? He is issuing the actual real holy war, and he won, okay? And so he's fulfilling that. He's fulfilling unleavened bread. He's keeping the real Passover in the Zadokite Passover, the night before in a very intimate setting. And then he's being a witness because he is so loving and he is so good. And this should be a testimony to us too, is that he even met the Judeans on their calendar that year. All right? So don't ever let calendar divide. Because guess what? He met them there. And if also you can see that in other times he goes to the feast of the Jews, and what does he do? He ministers to them, right? Okay? So just because we have calendar differences, don't let it be a thing of, oh, well, we're doing our Passover tonight and your Passover's Thursday. We're not going to your Passover. Don't do that, okay? Meet people where they're at. All right, so I just want to sort of prove this out to you a little bit. So let's go to John chapter 13, 1 and 2. And we're going to see that John is going to be writing from the perspective of the lunar calendar. He's not following it. He's just writing from that perspective. And so John 13, 1 and 2, it says, Now before the feast of Passover, when Yeshua knew that his hour had come and supper being ended. Okay? So this is the night before Passover. Whose Passover? The Passover of the Jews, okay, on the lunar calendar. So this is that night, and it's the night of the Master's Supper, okay? So that stays consistent there. Wednesday, this is the night before the Wednesday Jews' Feast of Passover. Now let's go to Matthew 26, and we'll see the Synoptic Gospels. And I told you last night that Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they are writing from the Zadokite calendar perspective. And it says in Matthew 26:18, and it says, "And he said, go into the city to a certain man and say to him, the teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples." So the disciples did as Yeshua had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. Okay? So we've got one gospel saying that the Passover was the next night. We've got three Gospels, because you'll see that Mark and Luke say the same thing, saying that Passover was the night that he ate the bread and drank the wine. Okay? So what's going on here is that we have to understand that John's writing from the perspective of the Feast of the Jews. Okay? But Yeshua does keep the Zadokite Passover on that Tuesday night. And so just to take a look at this, we've got Passover here on the 14th on a Tuesday. And I want to show you how the death and resurrection works. All right, so he's killed on the 15th, on the first day of unleavened bread, which was the same day, that evening would have been the Passover of the Jews. And so he's in the ground at the evening, he's dead and in the ground at the evening on the 15th. And so from evening to evening, let's count 15 to 16, one day, one night. 16 to 17, one day, one night, and then 17 to 18, one day and one night. We know that by the time Sunday morning gets around, the first day of the week, that he's out of the grave, right? So he's resurrecting at some point after the sun is set on Shabbat and before the sun has risen on the first day, all right? And it makes sense because we get 3 days and 3 nights, and he resurrects at some point in that dark period between the end of the week and the first day of the week. All right, so I just wanted you to see that visual, and we'll come back to this visual in just a second. All right, so let's go to John chapter 20, because you see first fruits down here. First fruits is not where you usually think it is it? No, okay, let's talk about first fruits. So let's go to John chapter 20. Okay, so we've all been taught that that the Feast of First Fruits is the day that Yeshua resurrected from the dead, right? Okay, Resurrection Sunday, Yeshua, Feast of First Fruits, all this stuff. But let's take a second look at that. Okay, so we're going to start in John 20 and just John 20 verse 1. Now the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So let's establish that we're on the first day of the week. Okay, we've got that established. Continuing down the chapter, verse 15. She, being Mary, supposing him to be the gardener, said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him, "Rabbi," which is to say, teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. But go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and to your Father, and to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord and that he had spoken these things to her. So we're on Sunday here. If you'll pull that back up real quick, Corey, sorry. We're on Sunday here on the 19th, okay? The 19th. And Yeshua has resurrected, and he sees Mary, and he tells Mary, "Do not touch me, because I have not yet ascended to my Father." All right? Keep that in mind. Okay, let's go to verse 19 and 20. Then the same day at evening, still Sunday here, so Sunday evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, where the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews, Yeshua came and stood in the midst and said to them, "Peace be with you." And when he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. And the disciples were glad that they had saw the Lord. He showed them his hands and his side. Now moving on to verse 24. Now Thomas, called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Yeshua came. The other disciples therefore said to him, "We have seen the Lord." So he said to them, "Unless I see his hands, the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Doubting Thomas, right? Okay. So let's move on to continuing right here. It says, "And after 8 days, his disciples were again inside, and Thomas with them. Yeshua came, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, 'Peace to you.' And then he said to Thomas, 'Reach your finger here, look at my hands, reach your hand here, and put it into my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing.'" Okay, so on the 19th, this is when he shows himself to Mary, and he says, "Do not touch me." He shows himself to the disciples. They don't touch him. And then it says 8 days later. All right, 8 days later from the 19th puts you on Monday the 27th. All right. And mysteriously, guess who can touch him now? Thomas, right? He says, "Mary, don't touch me. I haven't ascended to my Father yet." 8 days later, Thomas, touch me. So what's going on here? At some point in that 8-day period, he ascended to his Father. Had to have. Okay? Let's see if we can link this together. Let's go to Numbers chapter 19. And I'm only going to read a portion of it, but if you take some time to read the whole thing, it's really interesting. And this is all about the red heifer sacrifice. All about the red heifer. And I'll start in verse 11 and read through 13. Numbers 19, 11 through 13. It says, "He who touches the dead body of anyone shall be unclean 7 days. He shall purify himself with water on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, then he will be clean. But if he does not purify himself on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, he would not be clean. Whoever touches the body of anyone who has died and does not purify himself defiles the tabernacle of the Lord. That person shall be cut off from Israel. He shall be unclean because of the water purification. Because of the water of purification was not sprinkled on him, his uncleanness is still on him." Yesterday we read that we talked about. Steve mentioned that Yeshua came to fulfill all righteousness. Right? Okay. So whenever he was on the cross, did he not take all death and sin upon him? Right? Okay. So he literally took all death on him. Based off of Torah, guess what? Doesn't mean he sinned. He's just unclean, right? Okay, also, guess who else touched a dead body? Mary, when they took him off the tree. So guess who else was unclean, which couldn't touch him? Mary, which is why he says, "Do not touch me." All right, so pull that back up, Corey, that first month again. If he resurrects on the 18th, sometime in the dark period of the 18th, let's look at this and start counting. We got the 19th is day 1, purification. The 20th is day 2. The 21st is a Shabbat. That's also the 3rd day. What does it say down here? Purify himself with water on the 3rd and on the 7th day. This is the only week of the entire year that you have the 3rd and the 7th day, 2 Shabbats. Only week of the entire year. What does it say? 3rd day and on the 7th day, purify yourself. So he goes through some type. We don't have the details, but he goes through some type of purification, and we see the 3rd day and the 7th day, of course, marked out. All right, and then we get to the point where guess what? He is now pronounced clean, and then he can ascend to the Father on the 26th, that Sunday. He can ascend to the Father as the first fruits from the dead, okay, and present himself as the wave offering, as the offering to the Father from the first fruits, or from the dead, first fruits from the dead. And so when I read this, I was like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. but also, does it not mirror a believer's life? Okay? Because all of us, okay, we've all been celebrating just the resurrection, and we should celebrate the resurrection 100%, and we should be celebrating it during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But everybody in the world celebrates the resurrection. Well, not everybody, but you know what I mean. Everybody celebrates the resurrection. And guess what? Everybody's going to be resurrected. The righteous and the unrighteous are going to be resurrected. But our goal should be to be resurrected into the Father's presence, just like He was, which means when we come to faith, we go through a cleansing sanctification process, and then we can get to that first fruits day where we can be in His presence, okay? So we even see this in our own lives, and there's so much depth there, but unfortunately, because we just haven't understood, we've only made it about that one day in the resurrection, and that's it. But there's so much more that Yeshua was doing, and that's actually the day that He goes in and purifies and cleanses the heavenly tabernacle, okay, which we'll talk a little more about later on. But let's move on a little bit because there's always going to be, a little pushback from other calendars. And so I want to address first fruits from the point of Joshua, from the perspective of Joshua. Okay, so let's pull up Joshua chapter 5, because this one is usually used to show that this first fruits cannot work. All right, let's pull up Joshua 5 verses 10 and 11. Okay? And I'll be reading from the Masoretic text. Now the children of Israel were camped in Gilgal, and they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight in the plains of Jericho. And they ate of the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day. Okay, so what is this saying? If you go back and you read Leviticus 23, they could not eat the new grain until first fruits. That is first fruits. First fruits is eating the new grain when you get into the land. So what is this saying? First fruits is happening the day after Passover, and it's the same day that they're eating unleavened bread. Okay? So essentially what this doctrine is going to promote is that Passover is happening on a Saturday evening, and then Sunday, because the first day of the week has to be first fruits. We read that as the day after the Sabbath. But Sunday is going to be not only the first day of unleavened bread, but also the Feast of First Fruits. And that's just how it fell that year, is what people will say. But let's take a look at my favorite thing ever. Maybe not favorite thing ever, but our saving grace, the Septuagint. Okay, let's take a look at the Septuagint and see how it reads. And the children of Israel kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at evening, to the westward of Jericho on the opposite side of the Jordan in the plain. And they ate of the grain of the earth, unleavened and new barley. It doesn't say nothing about they ate the next day on the very same day, nothing at all. That is a Masoretic text edit and change to support their calendar, 100%. Okay? And I'll be honest with you, the 360-day calendar, a lot of people who study that and who are following it, they actually say and will agree that the first year coming out, the Exodus, happens just like our calendar. Like it started on a Wednesday, and the Exodus was on a Wednesday, the 15th day of the first month, which is always when it occurs with us. And so the first year works out quite nicely because I think they have the first year right for the most part. So when I was looking at this, I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to try it. I'm going to try and see, I'm going to put the first fruits date on the day that they say it is, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to put it on a 360-day calendar, and I'm going to count 40 years into the future and see if it lands on a Saturday, okay? Because if it lands on a Saturday, then maybe we should relook at this. And I did it, and I did 40 years, I did 39 years and 40 years just to have myself covered. And it was a Wednesday and a Friday that it lands on. So it doesn't even land on a Saturday 40 years or 39 years later. Okay, so it doesn't work at all right? So I wanted to make sure I did that. And in fact, it's over there in my notebook, in my bag. If you want to see all the stuff that I wrote out, I can show that to you later. Anyways, I also want to look at this other cool, interesting thing because we see more of the Feast of First Fruits in the New Testament. And let's look at Acts chapter 20. But we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and in 5 days joined them at Troas, where we stayed 7 days. You have the Feast of Unleavened Bread ending on the 21st, and then it says, and in 5 days we joined them at Troas. Count 5 days from the 21st. Where do you get? 26th, right? Okay, so just even some more evidence there that, you see the writers, they're not being explicit about this, but they're giving us hints. They're leaving us hints to show what's going on. All right, now let's talk about Shavuot. Yeah, so if you take a look at this, we've got the first 3 months up here. And you see the first fruits down here in the top left. And what do? You count 7 Sabbaths in a day. So it being a week later than usual, Shavuot is a week later than usual. And so when you count, your first Sabbath is the second day of the second month. And then you just go, that's 1, and then you go 2, 3, 4, 5. 6 is the 7th day of the third month. The 14th day of the third month is the 7th. And then so your Shavuot would be on the 15th day of the third month, which is on a Sunday, okay? So we're looking at the third month and the 15th day is where our Shavuot should be. And so I want to read a few verses, and let's go into Exodus 19, verse 1. So it says, in the third month, after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. Exodus 19:1. Now, when I started looking at this, I was like, okay, well, they came out on the 15th, so they must have got there on the 15th. But then I started doing some more research, and it does not say they came out on the 15th, does it? It does not say they came out of the middle of the month, or they got there on the middle of the month, does it? It says they came there on the same day. What day of the week did they leave Egypt? On a Wednesday, the 4th day. All right, will you pull back that calendar of the third month there again? Okay, if they got there on a Wednesday, that gives us either the 4th or the 11th to work with. Okay, I'm going to lean towards the 11th, and here's why. Right, so if they got there on the 11th is the Wednesday. So Moses gets the covenant offer. That's when, you will be a kingdom of priests, a kingdom of priests, or a royal priesthood, a holy nation, all that stuff, right? He goes back down, he comes back up the next day on the 12th and says, hey, they've accepted everything Yahweh said we will do, right? And then what does Yahweh tell him? He says, on the third day, meet me in the morning, all right? So we have the 12th is day 1, day 2 is Friday, the 13th. Day 3 is the 14th, all right? Yahweh descends on the 14th. He speaks the 10 words. What happens on that day? They shrink back. Moses goes up and gets the book of the covenant, right? We know this story. Then he brings the book of the covenant. It's really interesting, and really go, and I know this is a lot, but go home and count this later. He brings down the book of the covenant on the 15th. It's blood ratified, and they eat and drink and see Yahweh face to face on the 15th, on Shavuot, all right? So Exodus 24 essentially is the 15th, and everything leading up to that are those few days that go from the 11th to the 15th. People could argue that you could start at the 4th, but the 11th to me makes the most sense, but that could change. Okay, next I want to look at Shavuot and it being found in the book of Jubilees. And I just showed that the festival of first fruits occurs on the 26th day of the first month, meaning that it should be 7 Sabbaths, and a day later you should find Shavuot, which will lead you to 3/15, the third month, 15th day. So I showed just then how Exodus 19 shows Shavuot occurring on this 15th day. But also let's take a look at Jubilees and see what it says. Well, in Jubilees chapter 6, with Noah says that he keeps the feast of Shavuot, and he keeps it in the middle of the 3rd month, and this is when the covenant of the rainbow is given. Yahweh's promise that he would never flood the earth again. Okay, so this covenant is made in the middle of the 3rd month, right at the time of Shavuot, and it actually is also known as the Feast of Weeks, or the Feast of First Fruits of Wheat. Okay, so Shavuot has those many different names, or even the Feast of Oaths as well, or the Feast of Covenants, because we'll see here that covenants are made on Shavuot. In Jubilees chapter 14, we also see Abraham. The covenant made with Abraham that we find in Genesis 15, we see here in Jubilees chapter 14 that the covenant made with Abraham, the splitting of the pieces, is made in the middle of the 3rd month, which is the Feast of Shavuot. And just as Noah kept the Feast of Shavuot, Abraham also keeps it. And once again, we've got another covenant made in the middle of the 3rd month. Then we see in Jubilees chapter 15, chapter later, the token of the covenant, which is circumcision, is given at Shavuot as well. And so we've got Noah making his covenant on Shavuot, middle of the 3rd month. Abraham, same thing. Then the token of the covenant is given, which is circumcision on Shavuot. And then in Jubilee 16, we find out that Isaac is born on Shavuot in the middle of the 3rd month, the 15th day of the 3rd month. And so we see these covenants progressing, and then we also see the token or the sign of the covenant, and then the promised child of the covenant, Isaac, right? Also, we find in Jubilee 17 that this is when Isaac is weaned, is on Shavuot. And in Jubilees chapter 28, Judah is born. So we've not only got Isaac born as the promised child, foreshadowing Yeshua, but we've got Judah born, who is the line that Yeshua comes from. That royal line of Judah is also born on the 3rd month, 15th day. And another little interesting story is in Jubilees chapter 29. This is, I believe it's Genesis chapter 31, but as well. But Jacob and Laban make their covenant, and they agree to pass by one another, and they make a covenant, and it's about peace, and they have this big feast. Well, in Jubilees chapter 29, it is very specific that this happens at Shavuot. All right. So Jacob makes his covenant. Judah is born. Isaac is weaned. He's also born on this day. The token of the covenant with Abraham, which is circumcision, is given on Shavuot. The splitting of the pieces, the covenant itself given to Abraham, is made at Shavuot. And the covenant made with Noah after he gets off the ark is made on Shavuot. And then all leading up to Mount Sinai, which is when the covenant is made with the children of Israel in Exodus 24 on Shavuot, which leads us to the new covenant, which is fully realized in Acts chapter 2, when the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, is poured out on Shavuot. It's just absolutely amazing, but you cannot have a festival of first fruits that falls in the middle of unleavened bread and end up in the middle of the 3rd month for your Shavuot, or the 15th day of the 3rd month. It only occurs if the first fruits festival is on the Sabbath day after the Feast of Unleavened Bread has been completed, which is going to be the 26th day of the 1st month, which is what the Qumran scrolls say. It's what Jubilees and Enoch also point to, and what Scripture attests to as well, that we've already talked about, that going from the 1st month, 26th day, counting 7 Sabbaths, gets you, and a day gets you to the 15th day of the third month, which is the first day of the week, which is Shavuot. And all of these things, these 7 things in Jubilees, all occur on Shavuot specifically. And then, like I said, our Mount Sinai event and then our Acts chapter 2 event occurs on Shavuot. So this is just an amazing thing, and I wanted to show you this and point this out to you before we moved on. So now I want to talk about Moses' call up the mountain as well. And so let's go to Exodus 24, verse 12. And so this is immediately after Shavuot, right? Immediately after the 15th day. And it says, the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and be there, and I will give you tablets of stone and the law and the commandments which I have written, that you may teach them. That's the next verse after they eat and drink and see Yahweh, right? Jubilees, chapter 1, verses 1 and 3. This is how the book of Jubilees begins. It picks up in this exact same verse, all right? And it says, and it came to pass in the first year of the exodus of the children of Israel out of Egypt, in the 3rd month, on the 16th day, the day after Shavuot, that God spoke to Moses, saying, come up to me on the mount, and I will give you 2 tablets of stone of the law and of the commandment which I have written, that you may teach them. And Moses went up into the mount of God, and the glory of the Lord abode on Mount Sinai, and a cloud overshadowed it 6 days. And he called Moses on the 7th day out of the midst of the cloud. And the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a flaming fire on top of the mount. All right. So we've got this situation where we see that in Exodus and in Jubilees, this is the same event here, and Jubilees is dating it as 3:16. Okay? Keep that in mind. Now let's read Deuteronomy. We're going to go to Deuteronomy 9, and we're going to go to Deuteronomy 10. Okay? But let's start in Deuteronomy 9, verse 11. And this is the retelling of this whole story. And it says, and it came to pass at the end of the 40 days and 40 nights. So the first time he goes up and gets the 2 stone tablets, the end of those 40 days and 40 nights, that the Lord gave me 2 tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant. Then in verse 17, it says, then I took the 2 tablets and threw them out of my hands and broke them before your eyes, and I fell down before the Lord, as at the first 40 days and 40 nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water because of all of your sin which you committed in doing wickedly in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. Down to verse 25, it says, once again, thus I prostrated myself before the Lord. 40 days and 40 nights I kept prostrating myself because the Lord had said that he would destroy you. All right? So we've got, and I didn't know this literally until the past few months. Moses goes up the mountain, gets the tablets of stone, right? He's up there 40 days and 40 nights. He comes back down and he's fasting and praying because of their sin 40 days and 40 nights. Then after that, he gets called back up again, which we'll read in Deuteronomy 10, verse 10. This is the second trip, this is the second set of stone tablets. As at the first time I stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights, the Lord also heard me at that time, and the Lord chose not to destroy you. Deuteronomy 10:10. So we've got going up the mountain 40 days and 40 nights, coming back down 40 days and 40 nights, going back up 40 days and 40 nights. All right? So this is 120 days in total. Okay? When you put this on the calendar, it says he calls out to him on the 16th day of the 3rd month. Well, let's not count that as the first full day because it's 40 days and 40 nights. There's no way Moses is going to make it up on that first day to count the whole thing. So if we count not including that day, if you count 120 days, you end up with Moses, his 120-day count ending on the 14th day of the 7th month, which means he descends on the first day of Sukkot with the 2 marriage tablets in his hand. But that only works on this calendar. Only this calendar can you count 120 days from the moment that Jubilee says, you count 120 days with Moses fasting and praying up on the mountain, and he comes down at the same time, the first day of Sukkot. All right? I thought that was pretty cool whenever I read that. So essentially 317 to 714 are the full amount of days that he's there. Now let's take a look at something else. This is Israel departing from Sinai. And let's go to Numbers chapter 10, verse 11. Numbers chapter 10, verse 11. Now it came to pass on the 20th day of the second month in the second year that the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle of testimony. Okay, Corey, can you show the second month or something? Okay, so the second month, and you have it near you, but the second month there, the 20th day should be on a Wednesday, correct? Of the second month, 20th day is on a Wednesday. All right. Now let's go and let's read later on in verse 33 of Numbers chapter 10, and it says this. So they departed from the mountain of the Lord on a journey of 3 days, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them for a 3 days journey to search out a resting place for them. If the 20th is when they depart, day 1, 21st, day 2, 22nd, day 3, just in time to find a resting place on Shabbat, right? If you put this on any other calendar that's not a 364, guess what? Because remember, this is the second year of the Exodus. If it's a 360-day calendar, you're not going to have your 20th day, second month on the fourth day, which means you're going to be traveling on Shabbat. I know there's different viewpoints on that, but it just works out perfect on this calendar. 20th day, second month's on a Wednesday. 1, 2, 3, find the resting place, right? Now I want to briefly talk about the 24 courses of priests, okay? Because we'll talk about this a little more later this afternoon. But David, King David, okay, establishes the 24 priestly and musician cycles, okay, the courses to serve in the temple. So he had 24 courses of priests who would come in and do the animal sacrifices, and then he would have 24 courses of musicians who would come in and sing over the sacrifices and worship, all right? And so he establishes this in 1 Chronicles 24 and 25, right? And if you've ever wondered, where do these 24 elders come from in the book of Revelation? Well, the only time you really find anything else with the number 24 is right here, the 24 courses of priests. And this is actually, they are the Zadokite priestly lineage, all comes from these 24 priestly courses. You can go ahead and, let's pull up what it looks like. Okay, so these are the 24 courses right here. And this is their order, 1 through 24. And if you notice, number 8 right there is Abia, however you want to pronounce that. And we talked about yesterday that a very famous person descends from this course, and his name is John the Baptist. Okay? So these are very, very important. And then we also see the course that follows Abia is Yeshua. And that'll be really fun to look at this afternoon. And so all of these courses and these priests have names, and they actually are very prophetic, and we'll look at that, some of that later this afternoon. Do I have the musicians as well? Yeah, let's take a look at the musicians. And so here's the musician courses that correspond with the 24 priestly courses as well. And I am not as familiar with the musicians courses, their names at least. I'm still trying to learn because all of them are very prophetic, and you look into it, it gets really cool. So what'll happen is when you would come and serve into the temple, basically a priest, bring up the first month, if you don't mind, the first month calendar. So let's look at this. So let's say you would have a priest that would have started on the last Sabbath of the previous year. Okay, the priest and the musicians course. And it would have gone through, and they would have exited on the Friday, and then a new priestly course would have entered, and they would have served that week from the 4th through the 10th, and then a new course for the next week and the next week. So you've got 24 courses, so they would serve at least 2 times a year, and then 4 of them would serve 3 times, and it rotates. So if Abia is serving I know this isn't when he serves, but if Abiah was serving, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, in 6 years, he's going to also, again, serve on the Feast of Unleavened Bread, if that makes sense. So it's really nice how that works out. So we'll talk about a little more about that later on. Now I want to talk about what we like to call the new moons. Well, I don't like to call the new moons, but what people call the new moons. But we know that the translation in the Hebrew is Rosh Hadesh, which a lot of people have coined as head of the months, okay, or head of the month. But after further researching this, and this will become more important, especially later on this afternoon, it does not mean new month, it does not mean new moon, nor actually new month, okay? It means head of the months, okay, or head of the month of that season. And this is important. Will you pull up the big calendar for me? All right, so the first of the first, the first of the fourth, the first of the seventh, and the first of the 10th, those are actually your Rosh Hadeshes. Those are the first day, or they are the head of the first month of that season. And I'll give a little bit of scripture or I'll give something from Jubilees to support it. All right, Jubilees 6:23. And it says, on the head of the first month, and on the head of the fourth month, and on the head of the 7th month, and on the head of the 10th month are the days of remembrance, and the days of the seasons in the 4 divisions of the year. These are written and ordained as a testimony forever. Okay? So where we've been doing monthly, we've been doing, new months, new moons. Really, when you get down into the calendar, as you look at it and as you begin to read Jubilees, and this will make a little more sense later on this afternoon, really the Rosh Hadeshes, or the times you see new moons, they're actually referring to the heads of the season. But if you notice, go back, to the big calendar. The cool thing is about this is if you know the first day, when the first day of the season is, guess what? It's the exact same pattern every time. So if you know day 1, you know where the rest of the 91 days are for the rest of the season. And so it's very nice how that works. So essentially, first day of spring, first day of summer, first day of fall, first day of winter. All right, those 4 are your Rosh Hadeshes. And remember, it said in Jubilees chapter 6, verse 23, that these 4 days were known as days of remembrance or days of memorial, okay? And now let's go to Leviticus 23, because this is really cool. This is the only time this shows up in Leviticus 23. And it says, in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall have a Sabbath rest, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. This is the only time you find the word memorial in Leviticus 23 at all. And it just so happens to coincide with the only Rosh Hadesh, or head of the season, that's found in Leviticus 23. Okay? So we have evidence from Jubilees and from Leviticus that this specific day, or these heads of the seasons, are known as memorials or days of remembrance. All right? And Jubilees has a lot more to talk about with those, but we just don't have time. So last thing I'll end this part with is let no one judge you. Okay, Colossians 2:16 and 17. So let no one judge you in food or in drink, or regarding a feast or head of the months, or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of things to come, and the substance is of Messiah. Okay. Don't let anyone judge you, and don't judge anyone else, but don't let anyone judge you of keeping this calendar or keeping the calendar that you feel convicted, okay? Because it's not worth all of that, and we'll talk about that later. But I was reading this, and we always read it from more of he's telling, hey, keep the feast, don't let the pagans, judge you. Wonder if he's talking about, hey, because if you read the context there, he's talking about nailing, the ordinances to the tree. He's talking about, we're no longer under the law. I wonder if he's talking about maybe don't let anybody else who's not keeping this same calendar judge you. Okay, that's just another a deeper understanding there, or I think a deeper look at that chapter and that section of Scripture. But that's just the basics 101. I know this is a lot to take in. There's a lot. This is down here for right now. We're about to go up a lot more in a few minutes.